Um, okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting to be back working with you and doing this for Sunlight and MuckRock, which I was a fellow with. Which I love MuckRock. So if you don't know MuckRock, you should, and you should support them. They're great. That's my little soapbox moment there. But my name is Albert Serna Jr. I'm the executive editor and founder at the Los Angeles Center for Investigative Journalism. It's a small nonprofit here in the San Gabriel Valley, just outside of Los Angeles, but everybody says we're in LA, so why not? And we cover just everything in an investigative format. Previously, I worked with Open Secrets, where I was a Roy Howard Fellow, investigating the influence of money in politics. Looked at a lot of data. During that time, I focused specifically on Indigenous issues. Before that, I was at MuckRock, received my master's at ASU Cronkite, and I've been reporting forever, doing all kinds of stuff. But my focus has always been somewhere between criminal justice, documents, and in LGBTQ issues. And surprise, I also am a member of the LGBTQ community. So I feel like that gives me a little bit of more credence to talk about this stuff. So I want to take you guys through some data that you can find readily available that isn't always looked at or at least not heard about. And it's stuff that you should be able to use in your reporting and also stuff you just should know in the back of your mind or have in your pocket in case something happens. I have a few slides. I'm going to share some videos with you that I recorded and just talk through them on how to access that data, where that data comes from, and then how you can use it in the future. As Elizabeth said, if you have questions, just drop them in the chat. I'm going to leave a lot of room for questions at the end to discuss different types of things. If you want to talk about story ideas you have and maybe where to get that data, and I didn't include it in this presentation, I'm happy to talk with you on that and brainstorm ways to get it. So I'm going to start here now, and I'm going to hope that all of my videos play. But if they don't, I have our tabs open so that I can walk you through those as well. All right. So, first of all, tracing the truth, right? It's data that you should know. Hopefully that you want to know, but definitely stuff that you need to know. So we got to get an understanding of what LGBTQ data is. And I think that we oftentimes think of LGBTQ data as simply, stuff about marriage equality and rights, but it's so much more than that because when we talk about the LGBTQ or queer community, we have to think of a multidimensional community. There's issues with criminal justice, finance, political information. We have to look at demographics because not all queer people fit one specific mold. So all of that goes into LGBTQ data. It also includes folks who are anti-LGBTQ. And I mean folks who are working actively to either stifle the rights of queer and trans people or who are trying to pass legislation to make it harder to change your name on a birth certificate or get married or bring your spouse over from another country. So that data also includes anti-LGBTQ folks. So just because it's LGBTQ data does not mean that it isn't also anti-LGBTQ data. And we have to figure out where to find this. And there's a lot of places that we can look, including places that are specifically for research, places that do advocacy, and even folks that do strategic planning. And I really want to emphasize the strategic planning because you will find that a lot of companies track your phones and your information and what you're watching, and they use those metrics and data to target you, right? So you might watch some information, watch a video about, a wedding destination, and you might get more videos on that. And we know that that's how they track stuff. That data isn't always public, and it's really, really hard to get. But I did want to mention that because if you ever find yourself with a close connection to one of these data mining companies, you can probably ask, hey, what kind of data do you have on, queer communities or folks? So get that stuff. But we want to look at charities and nonprofits because they are probably the first place to go. Looking at, how they can advocate and support or advocate against LGBTQ communities, right? We want to look at political groups, obviously, because they're trying to get constituents to vote for them, either in support of their policies or against whatever policies they have. And so there's a lot of political data out there that can be used and is really helpful when you're writing or looking into these communities. And then obviously government agencies, we have the Census Bureau is the big one that comes to mind. That's kind of changed in the recent administration. We're not easily accessing these data across the board, but still good. We can think of things like the DOJ, and then we can look at local governments, small g government, right? Your cities, your states, your counties, they all collect information as well. And it's not always granularly broken down into like sexual identity or gender, but you might find in some instances that that's the case. And when we look at criminal justice, we can see some of that. And we get to that part later in the presentation, we'll be able to talk how to access that data. And so I want to start with the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC. It's a 501(c)(3) nonprofit group that tracks and advocates against hate crimes and extremist groups. They basically file lawsuits, collect data, excuse me, and advocate for reforms across the country. They look at issues dealing with race, identity, and immigration status, even in some cases. Uh, there are some concerns that they are overly broad when they classify some of their groups as hate groups. And I put hate in quotes because, sometimes things get mixed up. But overall, I haven't seen any major errors. I don't personally have any complaints. I think they're a good resource. Um, with any data that you collect, any data that you find, unless it's from 100% trusted source, it's always best to clean it, review it, and make sure that there's no errors. Most of the data that gets collected is, processed by human eyes, and humans are imperfect as much as we try not to be. So just, you know, that little caveat that you might find a group on SPLC's hate center or hate map, and you're like, hey, I don't know that that's a hate group. It's best to always just do your reporting on your own. So I want to start with the hate map. And it is this map that the SPLC provides that shows a bunch of different hate groups across the country. And we can see down here some key metrics, right? Over time, they've collected from 2000 to 24, which is, they don't have 25 yet. And we can see that it's a good chunk of time. And it includes all kinds of ideologies. And then it shows you just your basic information about how many groups there are per capita. And you'll see here that in certain parts of the US, they've been able to track larger amounts and larger numbers, like down here in Florida, and then across the West Coast. And I find it interesting that, kind of in the mountain areas, you don't see a lot, even though that might be where we expect to. And then across the side, you can see some, breakdown by ideology, and you can see the different ideologies that they track. Obviously, we're focusing on LGBTQ data here, but if you really wanted to get into it and get granular, you can find some of these. And I want to be clear that there can be overlap. So up in the corner, let me pause this really quickly. Up in the corner over here, you'll see their definition of anti-LGBTQ, what it means and how they define it. You can take your own definition for this and make it more broad or more narrow, depending on what you want, and still use this information. But, obviously, this is kind of their data dictionary. So, central theme of anti-LGBT organizing and ideology is the opposition of LGBTQ rights in support of homophobia, heterosexism, and cisnormativity that often expressed through demonizing rhetoric, et cetera, et cetera. So just to be clear, like that's their specific definition. If you have a different definition, you can certainly apply it here and filter out on your own, which I'll show you some data clips in a second here. But just keep that in mind, right? Some of these definitions that we'll be talking about and seeing are from a very specific group. So, all right. Then we can look at some of the toolkits that they provide here and just some related information that they give you. And these are all just reading. I encourage you to do the reading. As a teacher, I always encourage my students to do the reading. It just gives you more insight. And then we can go down to a state level, right? And if you click on any state, you'll be able to see the groups that the SPLC has identified for the given year. And you can go back in time, you can go forward in time, you can set it whatever you want. If you want to see how many hate groups or anti-LGBTQ hate groups existed in California in 2022, you can certainly find that, but we're using 24 for this. And by the way, these are a mix of local and statewide. When the states have that ribbon, it means that there's a group that is not just in one specific location, but it's a state active statewide. Um, and it gives you this nice little list here, right? And you can see all of the different hate groups that are anti-LGBTQ in California. And if you go in, you could actually select the area and it'll tell you where they are. So this one's in Anaheim, this one's in Santa Ana, both in Orange County. And then we'll come over here to Torrance, which is in Los Angeles, and also in Santa Ana again. And then we can go up into Northern California, or Central California, and give you a little more information. There's not specific. For that previous one, it was the statewide group. And just go through and look at all of the different areas that you find. And you'll see that we can go back to our state area and find out, just select by state and it'll move us. And it's really easy to use. And it's a valuable resource just in general if you're not sure what you're looking for. I have used this in other reporting beyond LGBTQ coverage, specifically when it came to white nationalism, and there's a lot of crossover there. And you'll see that in some states they haven't been able to find one, at least in this year, but you can go back in time essentially and find more stuff. So again, Florida has quite a few. These names you might find repeating because these groups often have chapters as well. Excuse me. And so we can come down here and we can get into the download data. And I'll show you I downloaded the data from Florida. I'll show you on the next slide. And you can download the data either individually or you can download the data by national. So we're going to close that out. We're going to zoom out of here. We're going to look across the country and then go back down to our download data. And that gives us the information that we basically want. And I think that's the end of this recording. Oh, and some more information, right? That they release. And this is their own writing, more hate, white supremacy, and then some information by their numbers that you can easily access. And I like to include this stuff when I talk about anti-LGBT groups because you will find that there's a lot of crossover, like quite literally a lot of crossover. If you go into, for example, white supremacy or Christian identity or Christian nationalism, some of these groups also have anti-LGBTQ practices. So that's why I think it's always good to just kind of not rely in one specific area and be willing to branch out and see what these groups are about. You might give them a click, which is unfortunate, but it helps you in your reporting and collecting more data. And so the data that I was able to download in Florida, for example, from the SPLC, just gave me some very basics, right? Simple, I uploaded it to Google Sheets. Normally, I would put it into RStudio so that I can filter and clean it up a little bit. But we can see the names of the actual groups, what SPLC has deemed them as, their own personal ID, ideology, obviously, state ID. This is Florida. The exact place they're located. They've given us their own longitude and latitude, which is great. And then, whether or not it's a statewide group, and then links to their information. So that's just the Florida data. And this will be kind of similar state by state if you're willing to download it. And this is the national data. So if you look here, you'll see different areas. So we start with Arizona, we go down to California, Colorado, and basically the same information. And it's all there. And I don't think I have any that are, oh, here we go. It's the Gays Against Groomer. They're a California group and they're a statewide group, which is why we have true. And this is a little interesting. It's what gives us those stripes on the previous map. Hope I'm not going too fast. If I am, let me know. Put it in the comments and I can slow down and be a little more patient, I guess. All right. Next, I want to talk about the Human Rights Campaign because they also collect a lot of data and theirs is more aggregate. in terms well, maybe aggregate's not the right word, but they're just more comprehensive. They look at so many different facets of LGBTQ life and collect data and release reports on it. So you're not going to get a pretty little spreadsheet like this, but you will get their own data that they've clean shaped and put into charts. They're an organization, if you haven't heard about them, that has advocated for LGBTQ plus inclusion and equality for years and years. They've been known to fight for marriage equality, and also for against the bathroom bans for trans people. So they're really vocal. They've had some issues that people have had concerns about inclusivity, but I think they've worked really hard to fix that. So we'll see what happens. But they track data. And what's good about them is they track data at the local, state, and the national level. And they monitor how politicians vote as well. And they give you basically a tracker on or a scorecard on all of these areas. So they give you a scorecard for what is it called? Politicians. They give you a track scorecard for your state, for your company. So much data here that is available to give you insights. And again, with the caveat that you should always look at the data, ask where they get it from, and try to do your own reporting alongside this. And here we go. We're gonna go with another video. Hope this one plays. There we go. So the Human Rights Campaign has like a tools for equality and inclusion, and you can go into the resource when you go to their website, and it'll pull this drop down, and it'll give you the ability to search by topic. So if you really want to get nitty gritty, you can do that. But down here, we see different areas that they've released scorecards for or databases on. The municipalities I thought was really interesting. That one is not super granular, right? So I'll just pause it there for a second. Uh, if you're if you live in a small town and you want to see how that town scores, it probably won't be here. HRC, I don't think has the resources and abilities to go through at that level. But if you live in a big area like Los Angeles, you can find their scorecards and definitely view them. But if that is if you don't need just the local level, you can definitely use the state information. And so it scores everything from employment, education, housing, anti-conversion therapy laws, all of the things that might impact LGBTQ folks. And it goes state by state, and there's more information down there. But we can see if we just pick a random state here, Delaware, for example, we can see where they're at, and this is just a basic key of how they score. So they do have anti-LGBTQ laws on their books, and again, more related information. But we can see. Let me go back here a second so we can show you what that looks like. There we go. And you'll see that they still have laws on the book that criminalize certain things that are not, yeah, that don't make sense. So good to track. And obviously, the data is not available. Like, you can't see the actual facts, but this is just information to help guide you in your reporting. Um, and I think this one has no statewide policies on any of these things. They don't have sodomy laws or anything like that, which is anti-LGBTQ. And then we can get into our congressional scorecard, which has been pretty, I think, useful. They used to have it online, and I think if you use the Internet Archive, you can still see it. It's a searchable database where you can actually scroll through on your webpage without having to download anything. And it tells you how each member of Congress voted. You can see members of the Senate, you can see members of the House, how they voted. It even used to show you what how they were getting their donations. So now for the 118th Congress, and by the way, you have the previous ones there up, I think, to 108th. But for the 118th Congress, you click, you download the scorecard, and it shows you their analysis, their own information on what they've done. And, obviously we see their intro, We can get, if we zoom in, we can get some information on basics for that have come through the 118th Congress. And I highly, highly, highly recommend and encourage you to read all of the data dictionaries that you find with this information. Because if you're looking at data and you're seeing, oh, hey, they have a bad score on this, right? It might be that they're voting, in favor of something, but it's actually against a law that would be restrictive. And we can go through everybody's votes. We over here see ban on school lunches. Um, Let me get back there here for you. There we go. And you can see different states, right, spoken up by the states in the Senate, how they voted. There's a key. It'll highlight, what what's going on. And again, I really, really encourage you to either reach out, request this data, and do your own verifications, right? Humans are not perfect, and so we have to make sure that we're voting them, vetting them. So then we're good, right? Like I'm not going too fast, I hope. Okay, cool. So then we can get into open secrets, which I used to work for. But they track, if you're not familiar with them, they track political spending using publicly available FEC data. It's good for seeing how people are spending and what they're spending their money on, like what politicians are, directing their PACs to go to. And then it's also good for looking at big donors, who they're supporting, and what groups they're sending their money to, and then where that money goes. Um, their site is a little more difficult to navigate. I want to just preface that. It can be hard because there's just a lot of data. There's a lot of information. You can request their data. You can download some of it. I think after a certain amount of call or rows, you have to pay. But I think if you request it and reach out and you say that you're a reporter, you probably won't have that big of an issue. So again, just want to show you this video about how I did my search, and this is a very haphazard search, I think. And so you start with the Open Secrets homepage, and you have to click the search, which brings you to this page. And I searched under interest groups. That was the quickest way for me to get there. You can also search for LGBTQ. And I went down to interest groups alphabetically. Now, if I recall correctly, there used to be an anti-LGBTQ interest group, but I think it was removed, which gets us to LGBTQ rights and issues. And this will give us the groups who are spending money in support of LGBTQ rights and issues. And so we can see over here, we can also move around on their eligibility, their other areas right here for foreign and defense policies, gun control, gun rights, etc. Again, you might see some overlap with LGBTQ issues and other groups like abortion, pro-abortion rights, candidate committees, Democratic candidate committees. So also good to look at that stuff. And then it'll break it down also by it'll break it down by the totals too. So you can see over time how much was spent on LGBTQ. I'm just going to say queer issues from the 90s and onward. And this is up into 24. Oops. Why did that do that? There we go. Did I lose my page? There we go. Here's some. There we go. Sorry, bear with me for the technical difficulties. Okay. And then we can get into some background, right? And it'll explain again its own definition. And for the most part, these kind of align with each other from research organization to outlet to whatever you're looking at. But you have to just kind of go through and get the information. So um, over here, we can see that in 2020, LGBTQI groups spent 6.9 million supporting Democrats and, only Republicans. It's just good information to know and to have in your back pocket. Just more information, I think, that's useful getting you acquainted with this information. And then we can get into lobbying, and you can see who is lobbying on behalf of different groups. So HRC, who we looked at a little while ago, spent the most for this cycle, in the 24 cycle. It spent like $860,000. And then we go down even more. And these are places that you can look at, groups to keep in your folders or back pockets and see where you're going with that. And then we can go to monies to Congress, which is specifically who they're sending to. Um, Obviously, I think it's no surprise that these groups are spending more on Democratic members and Republican members. And this is the average contribution that we're seeing from these pro LGBTQ groups and companies. And then we'll look at contributors, and these are the actual groups that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of PACs, the political action committees. I want to be very clear. You might also see a lot of dark money groups. Drag Pack is kind of a dark money group. Kind of. It's a 501(c)(4). There's more nuance on dark money, and if you're interested in that, reach out to Anna Masaglia, who is an expert on dark money. But yeah, so it'll show you some of these groups. Interesting here is the Log Cabin Republicans, I thought. The National Center for Lesbian Rights, Los Angeles LGBT Center. And then we can see who they're giving their money to. And in 23-24 cycle, we saw that Kamala Harris was the highest recipient of money, which is 1.7 million. And then we get into other folks. We see Adam Schiff on there, Hakeem Jeffries, all these other folks. I've tried to search for anti-LGBTQ groups, but for whatever reason, I'm pretty sure that when I worked there, we had a tab for that, and I couldn't find it now. So um, basically, our best bet is to go into our ideology and our single issue. And I think that's kind of where we go from here. Yeah, there was nothing else on this part. And then you can search by group, right? Like Moms for Liberty, their PAC. If you know there's a specific group that donates to anti-LGBTQ politicians, you can search their information as well. So don't just rely on that one specific ideology. Do your research. And I think this works really well if you're looking at the extremist groups from the hate map and then taking that information or even the information from HRC and applying it to open secrets and seeing where they're spending their money. Makes for good money in politics reporting, I think. Let's see. Yeah, we can see other groups here that have spent, from industry breakdowns, all of that. And if I haven't lost you yet, which I hope I haven't, we can look at police and crime data. And this, as somebody who's covered crime and policing, is probably the most fun for me. It's also like really tragic and sad, but it's fun to dig into. So federal agencies track crime data for our underserved and minority communities like the queer community. They also do that for other groups. So this all applies to, if you're looking at people of color, you're looking at religion, this kind of translates very well. And the data can really help you understand what is happening nationally and even sometimes locally. Some police agencies and cities, even health departments, they track how quote unquote bias crimes or hate crimes, uh, how many occur, and they publish the data sometimes yearly, monthly, or quarterly. It just depends on the agency and what they choose to do. It can go back and forth. Again, the data is not always as accurate as we would like. And that comes from what is technically considered a hate crime, how much time the agency has, what resources they're willing to dedicate to this kind of policing. But it's still helpful. And I don't have a video for this one, but if we look at the Department of Justice, they have an actual hate crime statistics page. I think maybe 2 years ago, or even a year ago, before we saw a lot of changes to our federal government, it was more comprehensive. It was easier to get more information. So the DOJ gathers and publishes their data online. It's searchable, downloadable to the public. Let me see if I can share this. It wasn't letting me. Hang on a second. if I can pull up their actual website here. Mhm. Sorry. Okay. Um, okay, I don't think I have it on. Oh, here we go. Let's try this again. DOJ. Okay, so you can see here all of the information that we've got from 24. All of the data is generally a year behind because it takes them about a year to go through and get information. And we can navigate in different areas. We can learn about the hate crimes, what it is. Again, I want to focus on this. It's very critical that we understand what a hate crime actually is in this legal definition. And I'll get into that in a moment. But you can definitely go through and find different data by states if you're interested. You can look at, you know, more granular data. There's the laws and policies that are in across the state again. So where it is illegal to have, where hate crimes against certain groups actually are approved or I guess reported. Um, where did my data go? Um, this is not a very good site. So anyway, so we'll stop there and I'll go back to my slideshow. But the DOJ has fairly good information, fairly good data. It's just, again, used with caution because of we're seeing changes. There's not a lot of resources for that. Okay. And then I want to give an example of a local agency that does really well with tracking data. So the city of Phoenix in Arizona has a unit dedicated to bias-related crimes, which is to say hate crimes. And it's always good to check with your local city or agency. Most of them do track hate crimes, and most of them do provide data on some kind of portal. You might have to request it. You might have to be persistent, and you might have to just be very nuanced in how you ask for it and what you're asking for, but you can get this. Sometimes the meaning of and classification of hate crimes can be difficult. They might classify an agency might classify them directly with what the federal government does, but they might change that, right? So the federal government's definition is a hate crime is a traditional offense like murder, arson, or vandalism with an added element of bias. For the purpose of collecting statistics, the FBI has defined a hate crime as a criminal offense against a person, property, or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. Hate itself is not a crime, and the FBI is mindful of protecting freedom of speech and other liberties. So that little last line is crucial. People can say, this is my religious belief, and then the issue won't be classified as a hate crime. And what the law says is it has to have like I think it's two incidents to be labeled as a hate crime. So check your own areas, but yeah, you'll see information on that. Um, Phoenix's website has a bias crime unit, and you can see their data that is collected. And this is just a screenshot. Um, and it explains what the bias crime unit does, and you can get the data from one year to another. I believe Lookout, which is an investigative publication out of Phoenix, they cover Arizona. They did some research and reporting on the city's bias units. And I know some folks from Cronkite who've also done some reporting on this and how although this exists, they're not really providing appropriate responses to all of these things. Um, And this is just a actual data breakdown from their website. So it gives you information about how things are motivated. And we can see that anti-gay male, and this is from 23, so it's 2 years out of date. We can see, the totals over here. Specifically, we're looking at anti-LGBTQ. So ours would be in this area. And then the different types of offenses here. I think it might be more helpful to, you can probably do this. You should probably do this on your own, but classify what types existed, right? So we saw in February there were types of two incidents of hate or bias crimes against gay males. Uh, we want to know, were they robberies, aggravated assaults, intimidation, destruction or vandalism? That's stuff that you have to get granular and probably request. And again, the caveat down here, solely based on hate crime incident reports received from the Bryce crime units and verified according to federal reporting guidelines. And those reporting guidelines can make it difficult to determine whether or not it's a hate crime. Um, Okay, and I think that's all I've got for my slides. I want to give you guys the option and opportunity to ask questions. So, I'm going to open this up. And if you guys have questions or want to workshop ideas and try to get information, this is not, I want to be very clear, like the entirety of all the data that exists everywhere. There's a lot of other places you can go, but these resources, these places have been where I've started. And obviously, let your reporting take you where it's going to go and, ask questions, ask where you can get more data.
We actually do have a question in the chat. It's generally, have you looked toward moderate and right-ish groups that might give their own but reasonably truthful analyses of your data and present their counter worries?
I haven't done a lot of that. I think the tricky part is that I've tried to look at data that has the least amount of bias as possible, right? When you look at anti LGBTQ groups, alt-right, right-wing Christian nationalist groups, they're giving you a very small sliver of information. And although it might be useful to get that as like context for what they view, it doesn't really do much for the reporting other than saying, hey, this is what they believe. And providing the actual data or at least the more accurate data might be good, but I've never done that, and I personally don't feel that I want to give the space to that kind of misleading information. It's more harmful than it is not, right? We know that if we're writing something, readers will skip a lot. They'll skim things. They might just read the headline. They might see a photo. They might scroll and see a chart. And if you're using that data, they might be like, "Oh, hey, wait, whoa, there's another group saying this is not, this is the correct data," and create this dialogue of what is and isn't true. And I think that that's tough. So in the end, use your best judgment. If you feel that that would help your story or help your reporting or help you in your studies, by all means do so. But always, always, always put the more accurate data alongside to give context.
Do you have any follow-up questions for that? And if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. But otherwise, as we're waiting for more questions to trickle in, I'll just mention that Albert is actually going to be back end of January to do another session with us. And so it's kind of like follow on to this session that we had today. Today you learned how to like find a lot of this data and understand it and comb through it. And the session in January will be on sensitive reporting. Once you use this data, how do you report on it like accurately and sensitively? So make sure that you all sign up for that. I'll put the sign up for that in the follow-up email as well. So you'll just have that right there.
One thing I forgot to mention, and I realized I didn't put it in the slides, was looking at census data. So you will find a lot of information on census. And the last comprehensive report when it came to LGBTQ groups was around 2020. We To get around that, you can look at oh my gosh, cohabitation, like housing specifically and see who's living together, and you can make inferences, right? You can see two um, people living together as the sole income, right? And you can make inferences. We can't really say that those are queer data specifically, but we can kind of understand when people are living together. So there's nice little ways to go about and make estimated guesses, but again, unless it's said or proven, like don't use it. Just kind of say, okay, well, this city, let's take the city of West Hollywood, right? You're going to see a lot of, which is a predominantly gay city in here in just outside of Los Angeles. You'll see a lot of census data that shows dual income folks living together, not married, or married to men. So that's good to get as well. But think in the next few years, we might see more changes to how census data is released and delivered. So although it's always been fairly reliable, use with caution.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that too. I'll also put in, all of the links that Albert went through today. I'll make sure to include that in the follow-up email, so you'll have access to all of that. And I'll put the census tip in there too.
Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, any other questions today? I'll stop the recording. So if there's anyone who has questions that they don't want recorded,